Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. In Article 2 of question 28 of the first part of the second part of his Summa Theologiae, Thomas Aquinas is considering another one of the effects, the things that are brought about by love, and he calls this mutual indwelling, mutua inhaesio, and it means to literally be inhering within each other. So there's a kind of reciprocity to it. And, we talk about this metaphorically. You're a part of me, I'm a part of you, we're together. But, there's some reasons perhaps for thinking, that's just metaphorical, it doesn't really happen. So he's going to begin with 3 arguments against this idea that mutual indwelling is something that love produces. And he says, the first one is kind of a straightforward metaphysical argument. If you're going to claim that one thing is in another, what you're talking about is a container and a contained. And the same thing can't be a container for something else that also contains it. That just doesn't work the way that shapes work, right? So he says love can't cause mutual indwelling. Either the lover is in the beloved or the beloved is in the lover, but you can't possibly have both at the same time. The second one is also rather metaphysical. It says nothing can penetrate within a whole except by dividing the whole, engaging in some sort of dividing or distinction. But what does that? It's our faculty of reason that divides things, not the appetite where love resides, namely the sensible or the intellectual appetite, depending on what kind of love we're talking about. So that doesn't divide things. Reason does, but love doesn't. So if you need to divide things in order to mutually penetrate each other, well, it's not going to happen. So love can't do that. Then the third one says, if love involves the lover being in the beloved and vice versa, then the beloved is united to the lover in the same way as the lover is united to the beloved. Notice the assumption being made there, right? In the same way. But this union itself is love, as was stated just earlier in the previous article. So what's the conclusion there? The lover is always loved by the object of his love, which is evidently false. How do you know that? Well, there's unrequited love. There are people who love other people and, the other people don't love them back. Maybe even they hate them, right? So mutual indwelling would, in that case, not be an effect of love, because if it was, every time you love, there should be this mutual, reciprocal indwelling. So Thomas is going to address this after looking at, on the contrary, he that abideth in charity abideth in God, and God in him. Charity is the love of God. So every love makes the beloved be in the lover and vice versa. That's maybe a little bit too strong. Maybe that's going too far. Thomas is going to chart a kind of middle path. And he's going to say that the effect of mutual indwelling can be understood in 2 different ways, 2 different modalities, we might say. So it can be understood as referring to what he calls the apprehensive power, the power that grasps things, or to the appetitive power, the power that feels and desires and orients itself to things. So let's start with the first one. Referring to the apprehensive power, the beloved is in the apprehension of the lover. You have an idea of the one that you love in your mind. So in a certain way, they're in you. They are inhering within you. Now notice what he's going to say. The lover is also in the apprehension of the beloved, but it's not that the beloved has the lover in their mind in the same way as we just talked about. It's rather that the lover is in apprehension, in engaging in the act of apprehending in a interesting way. So he says, inasmuch as the lover is not satisfied with a superficial apprehension of the beloved, but strives to gain an intimate knowledge of everything pertaining to the beloved, so as to penetrate into his very soul. And he brings up, an example of this about the Holy Spirit, God's love, searching all things, even the deep things of God. But we could apply this to human beings. When you love someone, really love them, you want to know everything about them. You don't just want to know the superficial stuff. You want to truly know them. But notice what's left out here in looking at the apprehensive power. The beloved, the object of love, doesn't have to have this towards the lover at all. Now, it's a little bit different when we think about the appetitive. He says that for the appetitive power, the object loved is said to be in the lover inasmuch as it is in his affections, it's in his affects, right, his desires, his feelings, by a kind of complacency. And this means, taking satisfaction, we might say. How? Well, you can take pleasure in it, or it's good when it's present, or you can long for it when it's absent. This is the love of concupiscence. And we also have the love of friendship, which is willing good to the object of love, and really this is only going to be towards a person. I suppose it could be something that you personify, maybe a cause or something like that, but that's probably not really love of friendship. And so he goes on and he says, not from any extrinsic cause, like when we desire one thing on account of another, or wish good to another on account of something else, but because the complacency of the beloved is rooted in the lover's heart. There's something that they really want, that they desire. And so we speak of love and notice these metaphors as being intimate or of the bowels of charity. It's in our guts. Actually, one of the interesting expressions that some people use is saying, I love your guts, right? Which literally is kind of gross. But if you understand what's being meant, I love you with my whole being. Right? So he says, on the other hand, the lover is in the beloved. How? By the love of concupiscence and the love of friendship, but not the same way. Love of concupiscence is not satisfied with any external or superficial possession or enjoyment of the beloved, but seeks to possess the beloved perfectly, entirely, completely, by penetrating into his heart, as it were. So you love somebody else, you want to enter yourself into their very being or heart, which means that then hopefully they would actually love and desire you. And he says, in the love of friendship, the lover is in the beloved inasmuch, now notice this, as he reckons what is good or evil to his friend as being so to himself. There's what Thomas is going to call a kind of identification of oneself with one's friend. And there's metaphors for this. We are, two parts of one soul. This goes all the way back to ancient times. So he says, He reckons what's good or evil to his friend as being so to himself, and his friend's will as his own. So it seems as though he felt the good or suffered the evil in the person of his friend. So when our friend, something bad happens to them, it is something bad also happening to us because we are projecting ourselves, we are identifying ourselves with our friend. So he goes on and he says, insofar as he reckons what affects his friend as affecting himself, the lover seems to be in the beloved as though he were become one with him. But insofar as he wills and acts for his friend's sake as if for his own sake, the beloved is in the lover, right? And then he talks about a third way. This also has to do with friendship. Mutual indwelling in the love of friendship can be understood with regard to reciprocal love. And what does that mean? Friends return love for love and both desire and do good things for one another. This is a full friendship. And this is not just, possible in friendship relations. This is also possible in, spousal relations or other things as well. When we truly desire the good for the other person because we value them to the same degree as we do ourselves. And that's going to take effect in action, not just desiring, but actually doing things. And both people are doing that back and forth. So, a lot of different ways in which the beloved and the lover can be related. And this mutual indwelling takes place the most in reciprocal love of friendship. So, how does this help us with these arguments? So the first one is disposed of pretty easily. If we can say that container and contained are being applied in different ways, then it's not really a problem. The beloved is contained in the lover. How? By being impressed on their heart and becoming the object of their complacency. But the lover is contained in the beloved inasmuch as the lover penetrates, so to speak, into the beloved. So they're not containing and contained in exactly the same way. So that might be a good response. The second one is just pointing out kind of a issue of priority. The apprehension of reason precedes the movement of love. So, you don't need for love to be something that divides because reason has already given the division to love. So it can penetrate into the other, right? The third one, he says, well, this argument that the lover would always be loved by the object of love, that only applies to one kind of love or one situation of love, that reciprocal love that we were just talking about as being, the highest kind of love of friendship. And that, of course, for somebody like Thomas, that would be the kind of love that God has for all of God's creatures and the love within the Trinity and, all of those sorts of matters, right? So it's conceding that, this is something that you would expect, but only in a very limited set of cases. Actually, it'd be great if it was a much less limited set of cases, but it's probably not going to be so. So, in a way, mutual indwelling is an effect of love. Not every single kind of love is going to lead to mutual indwelling in a full respect. But this is very interesting because we've seen here now Thomas talking about not just this particular question, does mutual indwelling result from love, but a key facet of love, which is that the lover really does want to know the beloved and really does want to be there in the beloved, in their affections, in their thoughts, in their heart, so to speak. And I think that's an important point that might elude some people as they're working through the arguments in this particular article.